Hey everybody, it's Pastor Los with you for another Gospel Unplugged. And this week I am joined by my esteemed colleague,
Pastor Monica Hammersten. It's nice to see you.
And we are continuing in John's Gospels. We have been since December. And we have arrived at what I always call the conclusion of John, which is not quite the conclusion, the formal conclusion. It feels like a conclusion. It feels like he's done. I always read this and I'm reminded of flying into Newark Airport, where it feels like 7 out of 9 times as you're about to land, you pick up again and circle the airport one more time, because as we'll read these 2 short verses, it feels like John is wrapping things up. And then there's a whole other chapter, 21, which we'll read over the next couple of weeks. But for now, we're reading the formal conclusion of John, verses 30 and 31 from chapter 20. St. John writes, "Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written so that you may come to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that through believing you may have life in his name." Boom.
Boom.
Feels like the end.
It does. Well, and especially since it is titled The Purpose of This Book.
Yeah.
Like, here is your synopsis. Boom.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it comes right after the Easter story, and then Jesus appears to the disciples Easter evening. Thomas isn't there. A week later, it's the encounter with Thomas. And then this verse, "Now Jesus did many other signs," which I'm always kind of like, ooh, inquiring minds want to know. Like, what else?
What else? What did we miss?
Did he do?
I want to hear him.
But curious what grabbed your attention, what got you thinking?
Well, first of all, I just thought we're so blessed. I mean, you grew up, your dad was a pastor, right? And you grew up in a home with a pastor as a dad. We had the great blessing of growing up like in church communities of faith where we just grew up. And it was part of our being is Noah and the ark, and Jesus walked on the water, and the Good Samaritan, and Jesus heals the woman at the well, and Jesus heals the blind man. And there's so much a part of our being, just these stories of faith and healing and forgiveness, that I just thought, God, I sometimes just take them for granted. Like, oh, of course Jesus would have healed that person. Of course Jesus forgave that person. And of course Jesus went after the lost sheep. But what a blessing to actually know that, have it be part of your being. But for these people, Jesus was saying, this is for that next generation who weren't the eyewitnesses. So we're going to take an account of these stories. So for the people who aren't here, who don't see that. And for us, that would be for our children, for our grandchildren, for the next generation. And as it has been on and on for the last 2,000 years, that we're so blessed, and it's our responsibility to keep those stories going and make sure they keep being heard.
Yeah, that's a nice way to think about it. And it's easy for us to forget that the gospel writers are writing for people who don't know the stories, or they have heard some stories, but they don't know the whole story. They didn't see Jesus, and this is their way of passing it on. Sometimes it reminds me of, because a lot of people think the Gospels started being written down when those first eyewitnesses started dying, because as long as the eyewitnesses were in, you didn't think about it. But then you're like, here are all these great stories. We got to capture them. Kind of like when we were growing up and it was the greatest generation, the people who had landed on the beaches of Normandy and realizing this generation is passing, and all the interest in oral history. Let's capture their stories. And there's something very much like that with what's going on in John.
And how different they all are. Like, I don't think I knew until I got to seminary that many of our main stories were told in each of these 4 Gospels from a different point of view. And I love that, because something different is going to stick out, to everybody. I think of, we were just talking a few weeks ago about Mary and the nard and anointing Jesus with this expensive oil, and how in 3 of the Gospels, the writer points to the fact that someone in the room said, I can't believe you're wasting all this money and a year's worth of pay on this oil, and why are you wasting it here? You should sell it and give the money to the poor. But in one of the Gospels, Luke, he actually says, if this man were a prophet, he would have known what kind of a woman this was who was touching him. and that she is a sinner. So he saw a whole different thing,
different
not
story.
the
Yeah.
money out the window, but he saw, wow, Jesus did know who this woman was, that she was a sinner and loved and forgave her anyway. So just the different points of view of different people and different stories.
It's like when you're at the family reunion and a sibling or cousin starts telling this beloved family story, and you're like, that's not the way it happened.
Yeah, for sure.
And you realize you've been telling it very differently.
Yeah.
And the point isn't so much like, well, who got it right? But
No,
the point is
not
it
at all.
meant something to one and it means something to the other.
Yes.
And that's what John is sharing now. I always think the verses are interesting too, because like Luke has this, Luke starts out by saying, Dear Theophilus, I'm writing these down so that you will come to believe. Like he's really clear. This is why I'm writing the gospel, because you've heard a lot of stories and I want to lend some order to it and help you continue in your faith. We don't get anything like that from John until the very, very end, when he finally says, the stories I've given you, and clearly John's making choices. I didn't tell you all the stories. The ones I told and the way I told it was so that you would come to believe. Like John is after something. This is not a neutral account. John is he wants to provoke you, provoke me, provoke our people into a response. And that response is faith. And why? For the sake of saying, I believe? No, because as you believe, you have life.
Yes.
You look
Share
at things
that love
differently. Yeah, and so I think it's fun, too, to think of John like, okay, finally, you're telling us what you're up to. You are after us and after our faith because you want us to live, which is kind of a cool way to wrap things up. I
agree. That last, what you just referred to, the very last sentence when he says, but there are many other things that Jesus did. If every one of them were written down, I suppose that the world itself could not contain the books that would be written. And I think of each of us, and we all have our own individual stories and our own individual where we have been forgiven in our life and how in response we share God's love and God's story of forgiveness. And it strikes me that, think of each of us. If each of us wrote down our story, where we felt God's love, where we felt God's forgiveness in our life, and shared that with others, what a difference would it make?
That's a nice thought.
Yeah.
And a nice way to close.
Yes. Shall I close with a question?
With a question or two. We often do that.
Okay. I would say, just that, like, what is your story? You're telling of where you have seen Jesus in your life and experienced Jesus in your life, Jesus' love and forgiveness. So my question to you would be, if you could share your story, and you can just do it, in a couple sentences or a couple paragraphs, like they actually do in the Bible, but if you could share your gospel, what would it say, and who would you like to share it with that would benefit from it?
Nice.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks for being with us, spending a little time, and we look forward to seeing you in church.
Take care.